Houses of worship are being replaced by the freedom to practice their faith without the strict protocols of an organized religion.
Yes, but remember the Gallup poll was about houses of worship, not religious belief.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
I'm James Weingartner, sitting in for Pastor Lutz, and we're so glad that you've joined us. We're here for another interesting discussion, and we'd like you to meet our panelists, and so they'll introduce themselves. Go ahead.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I'm a Roman Catholic, and I serve as the Bishop of the Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I'm the Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest, and I am canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
And my name is Mel Robeck. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California, where I also serve the President as a Special Assistant on Ecumenical Relations. I'm also an Assemblies of God minister.
And our discussion today is about houses of worship. At the end of March this year, Gallup released a poll that showed America's membership in houses of worship had dropped 47%. By houses of worship, Gallup looked at Americans who belonged to a church, synagogue, or mosque. In 2018, the percentage was 50%, and in 1999, the percentage was 70%. This means that since the millennium began, there has been a drop of 23% of Jews, Christians, and Muslims who have membership in their respective house of worship. While membership in houses of worship has declined in every age group, the trend is most significant with young people. Political affiliation makes a difference as well. Over the past 2 decades, house of worship membership has fallen at twice the rate for Democrats as it has for Republicans. Some observations. Kelsey Dallas from Utah's Deseret News has written that this survey should not be interpreted as a spiritual crisis in the nation. Instead, it's an institutional crisis. Shadi Hamid in The Atlantic argued, American faith is as fervent as ever. It's just that it was once religious belief has now been channeled into political belief. Finally, Damon Linker in The Week has argued, many on the left have replaced religion with a devout commitment to social justice. Today, we'd like our panelists to discuss the ramifications of the decline of membership in houses of worship and what this means for the nation. Questions. Number 1, in your particular house of worship, how is this decline reflecting the ministry of your church or synagogue? 2, do you agree with Linker that many of our members who have left your house of worship are committed to social justice, or as Hamid suggests, holding on to their belief now being channeled into a political belief? Or 3, in the religious landscape of today, will the synagogue, church, and mosque be able to refashion themselves through a creative engagement with the changing culture, or will they simply retrench and atrophy? Important questions. Looking forward to your answers. We're going to begin with Bishop Michael.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting topic. I'd like to maybe take a step back and look at the shift from the experience of religion and organized religion, spirituality, houses of worship in the modern age to what has now entered this sort of postmodern age. It was really kind of a position of many secularists, if you will, or at least a dominant thought in academia in the modern period, that religion would eventually just fade away as science carried itself through as a progress, is progressively better, and there would be less of a need for religion because we'd know things through science. That's given way now because there's the same radical doubt that was attached to the claims of religion has now been attached to the claims made by science, and there's a radical distrust of authority in medicine and as a practice, and of much science as well. Some of that was due to the co-opting of science by ideologists, and especially in Germany before the Second World War, where the authority was corrupted. All right, now here in a postmodern world, I think secularization is really seeing that religion has been just privatized to everybody's own preference, and they choose a religion to meet their private needs, and then when they do come together, it's to reinforce their own private needs. I'm not so sure what this means right now. It's very difficult to get a long view of this, because what would it have been like if we took a poll in 14th century France about religious practice, about understanding of symbols? Sure, there were Christian symbols in the world. There were also Jewish symbols among the Jewish populations there. But what did they mean to people? We don't know, especially because there wasn't literacy. And I think that what my hope is that as things go, people are not going to join a religion for any other need except in the sense to deal with or to respond to the basic need that they have for God in their life, where a spirituality can correspond with a shared charisma, faith, and dogma, or shared beliefs. And I think that that's going to come around if we are patient and if we listen as pastors to what is it that people are looking for as people. But one other thing is that people say, well, I have a privatized spirituality and I'm going for my own needs and that. And, having talked to some people, that they'll refer to a 12-step group that they're a part of as their church or for spirituality. And yet, as they describe their meetings in this 12-step group, there's a ritual to it. It begins with a reading from the text of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It ends with a prayer. There is a response of sharing, and it is in an ordered way. There's even a collection, and so it seems to me that there's a basic human need, not just for spirituality, but for some form of religion that's beyond just simply the private.
Thank you. Ken and John?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Michael, for what you just said. I certainly don't think that any one of us on the panel can be pleased with the results of the Gallup poll, but that's even more reason for us to be discussing this topic today. In many respects, I think that the Gallup poll is a call for more progressive churches as well as evangelical and Pentecostal churches. It's a wake-up call. As the moderator's statement has argued, the most significant decline in houses of worship attendance is among younger people, millennials and Gen Xers. That means 36% of millennials people belong to houses of worship, although there is no percentage that is given to ex-Geners. This means people literally from 1965, people born from 1965 to 1995, that whole period of time has significantly decreased in church population. It's the people born before 1965, really, that it even brings the percentage up as high as 47%. So I think that we are facing certainly a questioning time of what is going on. And as I argued that this poll was not about houses of worship, but not religious belief. And I think that Michael even touched on that, certainly in what he was saying in relationship to Alcoholics Anonymous and other groups that meet, that certainly are structured within some form of religious belief. I think that one of the issues that we have to certainly point out is that the Christian right today has become a very potent ally of the Republican Party. And this, of course, carries baggage in itself in relationship to a religious belief. And in the article that was referred to by Shadi Hamid, he said a dip in the church's influence could hurt the GOP chances of winning elections in the future. I mean, you have less people coming to church, et cetera, and with that type of momentum, that could certainly impact the GOP. But others argue that this dip might not be such a bad thing. And one of the issues that certainly is raised, and it's interesting that both Michael and I are sitting on the same side here, because I suspect that we could be accused of that our religious traditions offer more strict protocols of organized religion, and that there is certainly a reaction against that in many circles today. Others would say that indeed this leads to a more progressive society that is more accepting of people who would not normally fit the norm, i.e. LGBTQ people and other people who are often maligned from the traditional faiths. And so we are facing a very different time, and one of the things that we will have to explore today around this table is where is that faith now being exercised?
Thank you, John. Rabbi?
So I think it's an interesting set of questions about what does the data tell us. And I think the data can tell us a lot of things. I think in some respects, the data tells us that some of the trends that began 30 years ago are beginning to crest, which is this hyper-individualism that we see in American society, the worship of what Arnold Eisen, the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, called the sovereign self. And the idea that the locus of authority no longer comes from a church or from a text or from a God even, it comes from within me. That I am the sole arbiter of what I will say is right or wrong, or of meaning or not of meaning. But what's, I think, interesting of the consequence of that trend is the lack of attention that most, I think, attend to the development of their moral and spiritual core. I think if you talk to a lot of people today and you talk about how they live their lives, raise their children, they will do everything they can to provide themselves and their children of every advantage in intellectual development, education, trying to help their kids to get ahead and so forth. And in whatever avocation they might choose, whether it's athletics or the arts, music, what have you. And if you say to them, okay, so you tried to give your family every advantage to develop their mind, and you tried to give your family every advantage to develop their body and their physical health, what are you doing deliberately to grow your moral core and your spiritual awareness? And they look at you like this. Because they haven't attended to that. They just assume that that's just going to develop spontaneously. And the fact is, it doesn't. Because I think if you also track the decline in religious observance, the decline in affiliation with religious institutions, you also see a decline in generosity. You'll find a decline in all kinds of other moral goods. I don't think people are leaving religious institutions to become more active in social justice. I think they're leaving religious institutions to become more active in self-serving aggrandizements. And I think that what religious institutions need to do is what religious institutions have always done, which is to be responsive to people. We live in what in our tradition we call a post-mitzvah world. There's no more have-tos. There's only want-tos. And so religious institutions have to present religious life in a way where people say, well, I don't have to, but I have to. There's such a compulsion because of what's going on there is so deeply meaningful and compelling that they choose it because of the richness it provides. And I think we're not doing a good enough job of trying to get to that.
Thank you. Mel?
That's really helpful, Dan, and there's a lot there to think about. As I've been sitting here, one of the things I realize is that as a historian, I have a very different way of thinking about how religiosity is expressed here in the United States as over against, say, the rest of the world, or in many places in the rest of the world. Most people don't realize that this was never a Christian nation. I'm really happy to say this was never a Christian nation. It was a nation that was built on Judeo-Christian principles. There's no question about that. It was a nation which was conceived of as being a monotheistic nation, so that Muslims, Jews, Christians all could be part of that. Nobody ever thought about all these Eastern religions and so forth. That wasn't even on their list because they were primarily Europeans, not facing Asia at that particular time. It's also the case that when America was founded, or the United States was founded, I should say, it was made up a lot of rebels, people that were running away, resisting all kinds of authority that was ongoing, including religious authority. There were lots of scalawags. There were a lot of entrepreneurs who thought, man, I can go over there and start something new. There were slaveholders. There were frontiers persons. You know, it was not a wonderfully rich religious reason for coming here. And if you check through what few records we have, it appears that right up through the Revolutionary War, the best that we can say is that 5% of the people attended church on a regular basis. 5%. Now today we're complaining that it's down to 47%, right? We have these ups and these downs, and they really are ups and downs in the history of the United States. So I don't get too concerned about the fact that we've dropped 20% in the last few years. I do think that you're absolutely right that it's come to the point where so many people, they know more than they know more than the people who are in the pulpit for the most part. Certainly in my church, I think I was telling someone earlier, if you have a Bible in your hand, it's much more acceptable, and it will always trump a person with an education. Always it will do that in my tradition. Now there are other religious traditions, Christian traditions and Jewish traditions, where that's not the case. But in mine, it's a very difficult issue. So, you know, we have these kinds of back and forth sorts of discussions. And I think that what's happening right now, we see a lot of young people who think they have all the answers, including the spiritual ones. And those spiritual ones are based on the internal reality that I am at the center of the universe. Well, maybe. But certainly to a certain extent, that certainly comes into play. But I think it's really important for us to keep perspective on this and not simply to say, well, you know, we're in a bad time because everybody's leaving the church. I think we do have an institutional crisis. I think that the writer in the Deseret was absolutely right that we have an institutional crisis. It's a lack of trust of leadership. It's the lack of their ability or willingness to speak to issues in a way that makes sense to people. I think we have a lot to learn from what's going on. So I think that these figures can be helpful to us. I'm not quite so pessimistic that it's saying this is where the future is headed and so forth. But I do think that it's a wake-up call for all churches, not simply Pentecostal and evangelical ones.
Well, I included all the churches. I even included the Pentecostals in there.
Yeah, I know you did, by name. I would even include the Episcopal Church.
I think just reflecting right now in my own experience as a bishop in the Southwest, here in 28 counties in North Texas, we currently have a lot of people going to church, all right? We don't have the problem as other parts in the country, that problem. But what concerns me is that Catholics are identifying a parish not so much about where they live and a community they're with, but it's where they go for services, all right, in the sense of whatever, they base it on a consumerist model, or also, and what I'm seeing is that many Catholics are identifying by other things, where you have a parish that's more predominantly of a right-wing view, and then others that have more of a left-wing view. There's racial voluntary segregation that's happening, and I think as a bishop and as a church, we have to challenge people on that. And I mean, there's so much a focus on intentional community that we're neglecting the community into which we are given, or that's given to us. and not just what we choose. And I think that's the crisis for institutions right now, at least as I see it.
I've heard that referred to as tribal by choice.
Well,
We
it's
choose
a
our
loaded
tribe.
word, but it's a loaded.
We're going to go to a break right now. We'll be right back.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
We do crave your input, so please send us something and communicate with us, become a part of our community, and we thank the Town Hall for their sponsorship. This is a fascinating subject, and we're going to have our panelists sum up their thoughts on it, and we'll begin with Bishop Michael.
I think houses of worship have a challenge before them right now, and if you look at crisis as an opportunity and not just a moment for panic, and that is to attempt to fulfill their responsibility to help to form consciences of people who are otherwise indifferent. In other words, to try to meet people where they are at, even if it's in a world of contemporary symbols, and to invite them in for a sense of belonging that is natural to them as human beings. I think also that what we are facing as part of this crisis is really a universal disposition of anarchy, and that transcends Republican and Democrat. On the right wing of the Republican sense, that is, many people choose to identify individually, is a libertarian ethic, which really eschews any form of hierarchy, may have some conservative trappings, but ultimately the great self is all that governs it. And then there's the opposite side, and you have sort of a Marxist collective whereby people are to eschew all authority for a collective of individual self, which also doesn't work and causes destructive. And both of these selfish ideologies are battling right now. I think we have to preach and live a respect for the dignity of God present in each and every human person, no matter what their ideology is right now, and the truth of that they in some way manifest God just by being human beings.
Beautiful words. Thank you, John.
Wow. I mean, what you've raised is a program in itself, simply because of the two divisions that you were making, and how these two parties, if you call it, can be so destructive, really, within the structure of religion, if it's organized religion or not. And so you've certainly given us a lot to think about. And what happens when a religion becomes a cult within a tradition? And I think that certainly was one of the issues that you were pointing out, and how easy it is, both in the libertarian part, but then on the opposite side, too, as you called it, the Marxist. I would not use that term, but the Marxist side, and how that can both be destructive.
Thank you, John. Mel?
Yes. We are in a unique situation here in the United States in that our churches and other religious institutions are all there on a voluntary basis. In Europe, it was kind of, you were required to be in church or perhaps in synagogue. I don't know the history of that as well. But the fact of the matter is, here in the United States, you had to appeal to people in such a way that they were going to carry the freight. they were going to pay the bills, they were going to call the pastors, and so forth. So I think that's really important because it is playing out in a very real sense. People are voting with their feet at this particular point in time. Okay, and I think that it's really an important message to the church and to other religious institutions that while we don't want to capitulate to culture, but we have to be in touch with the culture that's around us in such a way that they voluntarily come to the place where their needs are being met. And until we can find a good way to do that, we're going to see a continuation of that fall down the hill. But the fact is, I think we have seen ups and downs, and I'm not terribly concerned that we're on the final approach to nothing.
Dan?
So I think America, as was said before, is a country that's been built on freedom as a core fundamental value, which is a core fundamental value from Judaism, from the liberation of slavery in Egypt. The question, though, is freedom for what? There's an awful lot of conversation in America these days about my rights, and don't take my rights away, and a lot of what are my rights, which is different than duties and responsibilities. And I think that one of the things that religious institutions have to do is show how the engagement with holy acts and holy work fundamentally transforms the meaning and purpose and value of an individual's life so that they use that freedom to use their lives to engage with holy things. And that requires religious institutions to be responsive. They need to, as you said so well, they need to be responsive to the moment. They need to be responsive to human concerns. They need to be responsive to questions of purpose and meaning. And the more responsive we can be, the more I think people will choose to respond by saying, you know what, that's a place I should invest my time. That's a place where I should invest myself. Because if we're not offering those goods in a free society, people can find other sources for their own satisfaction.
Very good. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.
Thine alabaster cities gleam until